The stars above New Cascadia had never felt so cold. And Governor Yuki Tanaka stood alone on the observation deck of the Colonial Administration Building, staring up at the distant lights that had stopped answering 62 years ago. She was born here, as was her mother and her grandmother before that. 3 generations of Tanakas who had never set foot on Earth, who had never breathed air that was not recycled through the colony's atmospheric processors, who had never seen an ocean that stretched beyond the horizon. The colony world of Kepler 442b had been their home for 127 years now, ever since the first-generation ships had brought 12,000 hopeful souls across the impossible darkness between stars. Those first colonists had called their new home New Cascadia, naming it after the green forests of the Pacific Northwest they had left behind. And they had worked with desperate determination to transform this alien world into something that resembled the Earth they would never see again. They had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, turning barren valleys into farmland, constructing cities of glass and steel beneath a sky that held 2 small moons, and building a civilization of 2.3 million people who called themselves human, even though most had never met anyone from the homeworld for 65 years. The quantum relay had connected them to Earth and the inner colonies. Messages traveled faster than light, carrying news and greetings and the comforting knowledge that they were not alone in the universe. Then came the silence. Yuki had been just a child when the relay went dark, barely old enough to understand what it meant when her mother came home crying, when the news broadcast stopped showing images from Earth, when the scheduled supply ships never arrived at first. Everyone believed it was a technical failure. Surely engineers would fix the relay. Surely a ship would come to investigate. Surely Earth would not simply abandon 2 million of its children on the edge of known space. Weeks became months, and months became years, and years became decades. The hope that had sustained them slowly withered like a plant denied water, and the colonists stopped gathering at the communication center to wait for a message that never came. Some believed that Earth had destroyed itself in war, that the homeworld they remembered in old photographs and ancient video recordings no longer existed. Others thought that humanity had simply decided that distant colonies were not worth the resources required to maintain contact. The cruelest theory was that Earth had simply forgotten them, that in the vastness of human civilization, one small colony on the edge of explored space had slipped from memory, like a name on the tip of a tongue that could never quite be recalled. Yuki had grown up with a silence, had attended schools where teachers spoke of Earth the way ancient humans spoke of lost Atlantis, as a place that might have been real, but belonged now to legend and myth. She remembered her grandmother telling stories of blue oceans and green forests, of cities that held more people than the entire colony, of a sky that held only 1 moon and a sun that shone golden instead of the pale orange of Kepler 442. Those stories had seemed like fairy tales to young Yuki, beautiful but impossible, like dreams that dissolved upon waking. Now she was 53 years old, the elected governor of a colony that had learned to survive without Earth, leading a people who had stopped calling themselves colonists and started calling themselves simply the people of New Cascadia. They had built their own identity in the decades of silence, developing their own traditions and holidays, their own art and music, their own way of speaking that had drifted slowly away from the English of old. Earth Remembrance Day was one of those new traditions, a holiday that fell on the anniversary of the last communication received from Earth, a day when the colonists gathered to honor the memory of a homeworld most of them would never see. Tomorrow was Remembrance Day, and Yuki would stand before her people and give the same speech she gave every year, reminding them of where they came from while acknowledging that they had become something new, something that no longer needed Earth's approval or guidance. She would not speak of hope for reconnection. That kind of hope had proven too painful to maintain, a wound that never healed, because it was reopened every time someone suggested that maybe this year would be different. Instead, she would speak of strength and resilience, of a people who had faced abandonment and chosen to thrive rather than despair. The observation deck's doors slid open behind her, and she turned to see her chief advisor, Marcus Webb, a tall man with gray hair and worried eyes that had seen too many crises in his 60 years of life. "Governor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of bad news even before he spoke it. "The long-range sensors have detected something unusual." Yuki felt her heart tighten in her chest, because unusual was never a good word in the vocabulary of colony administration. Unusual meant problems, unexpected challenges, threats that demanded immediate attention. What kind of unusual? She asked, keeping her voice steady even as her mind raced through possibilities. Marcus handed her a data tablet, and she looked down at the readings with growing confusion, then growing fear. "Ships," she whispered, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. 12 vessels, Marcus confirmed, his voice grim. "And they are not human designs. At least, they do not match anything in our historical records of Earth technology." Yuki stared at the sensor readings, at the 12 blips that moved with purpose toward her world, toward the 2.3 million souls who depended on her to keep them safe for 62 years. They had waited for ships from Earth, had prayed for rescue, had dreamed of reunion with the homeworld that had abandoned them. Now ships had finally come, and they were not human. "How long until they arrive?" she asked. 3 days, Marcus replied. "Maybe less if they increase speed." Yuki looked up at the stars, at the cold and distant lights that had never answered their calls, and she felt something shift inside her. A transition from hope to fear that she had never expected to experience. They had believed Earth had forgotten them, had made peace with their isolation, had built a new identity around their abandonment. Now something else had found them instead. And Yuki could not shake the feeling that their 62 years of silence were about to end in the worst possible way. The alien ships hung in orbit like predators circling wounded prey. And Commander Zareth of the Velkari Dominion observed the primitive world below with a mixture of contempt and boredom. His species had conquered 43 civilizations across 6 centuries of expansion, absorbing them into the Dominion where they served as labor, as soldiers, as resources to fuel the endless growth of the Velkari Empire. Some species had fought back, of course. There were always those foolish enough to believe they could resist the inevitable, to think that courage could overcome superior firepower and centuries of military experience. Those species learned quickly, or they ceased to exist. Zareth studied the sensor readings of the human colony, noting their pathetic defensive satellites, their handful of patrol craft designed for asteroid deflection rather than combat, their cities that lay exposed and vulnerable beneath him. This would not even qualify as a conquest. It would be a harvest. His tactical officer, a younger Velkari named Kreth, approached with the preliminary analysis of the human settlement. "Commander," Kreth reported, "we have completed our scans of the surface. Population approximately 2.3 million. Technology level significantly below Dominion standard. Military capability negligible. Any sign of reinforcements?" Zareth asked, though he already knew the answer. "None, Commander. Our sensors detect no other ships within several light years, and their communication systems appear to be entirely local. This colony is isolated." Zareth allowed himself a thin smile, a gesture that revealed teeth evolved for tearing flesh. Isolated meant vulnerable, meant easy, meant that no one would come to help these soft creatures when the Dominion descended upon them. "Open a channel to their governing authority," he commanded, settling into his chair with the casual confidence of a being who had never known defeat. The communication link established, and Zareth found himself looking at a human female with dark hair and tired eyes. A creature who could not have weighed more than a fraction of his mass, who possessed no claws, no natural armor, no biological weapons of any kind. How such a fragile species had survived long enough to develop. Space travel was a mystery that did not interest him. What mattered was that they would now serve the Dominion like all the others. "I am Commander Zorath of the Valkyrie Dominion," he announced, his voice translated into the human language by the ship's systems. "And your world now belongs to us." The human female did not cower, did not weep, did not beg for mercy. She simply stared at him with those strange, small eyes that held an emotion he could not quite identify. "I am Governor Yuki Tanaka of New Cascadia," she replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "And I would ask what gives you the right to make such a claim?" Zorath laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge of his flagship. He had heard this question before, from dozens of species who thought that rights and laws and moral principles would protect them from the reality of superior force. "The right of power," he answered, "the right of strength. We are the Valkyrie, and we take what we wish because there is no one strong enough to stop us." "And what do you wish from us?" Tanaka asked. "Everything," Zorath replied. "Your world, your resources, your people. You will surrender unconditionally. You will serve the Dominion as laborers and soldiers, and if you are obedient and useful, you will be permitted to continue existing." He leaned forward, letting his size and his teeth fill the screen, a display of dominance that had broken the will of countless species before. "If you resist," he continued, "we will reduce your cities to ash and your population to a number more manageable. We will take what we want regardless of your answer, Governor. The only question is how many of your people will survive the process." The human female was silent for a long moment, and Zorath waited for the familiar pattern to unfold. The tears, the pleas, the desperate bargaining that always preceded surrender instead. Tanaka straightened her spine and met his gaze with something that looked almost like defiance. "How long do we have to consider your offer?" She asked. Zorath was momentarily surprised by the question. Most species collapsed immediately, their will to resist crumbling before the first shot was even fired. 12 hours, he said, deciding to be generous. It made no difference whether they surrendered now or later, and the delay would give his troops time to prepare for the landing. "Very well," Tanaka replied. "You will have our answer in 12 hours. The communication link closed, and Zorath turned to his officers with an amused expression. "Brave words," he observed, "but empty. They have nothing with which to fight, nowhere to run, no one to call for help. This will be the easiest conquest we have achieved in decades." On the surface below, Yuki Tanaka walked into the emergency meeting of the Colonial Defense Council, where every military officer and government official waited with fear in their eyes. What did they want? Asked Defense Minister Chun, an elderly man who had spent his career preparing for threats that had never come. "Surrender," Yuki replied, "complete and unconditional. They intend to enslave us." The room erupted in panicked voices, and Yuki let them speak, let them express their fear and their despair, because she understood that they needed this moment before they could move forward. "We cannot fight them," someone said. "Our weapons are useless against their ships. We should negotiate," another voice added. "Perhaps we can preserve some autonomy, some dignity." "Dignity?" Defense Minister Chun snapped. "There is no dignity in slavery. They will work us to death in their mines and factories, and our children will be born into bondage." Yuki raised her hand, and the room fell silent. They looked to her for leadership, for hope, for an answer she was not certain she possessed. "We have two choices," she said. "We can surrender and pray that our new masters are merciful, or we can fight and pray that someone, somewhere, hears us." "Fight with what?" Chun asked. "Our patrol craft cannot even scratch their shields." "With everything we have," Yuki replied. with our hands and our minds and our refusal to kneel. I do not promise victory, but I promise that we will not go quietly into the darkness they have planned for us. She activated the colony's long-range transmitter, a system that has sent messages into the void for 62 years without ever receiving a reply. This is New Cascadia. She spoke into the recorder. We are human. We are under attack by an alien force, and we cannot survive alone. If anyone hears this, if Earth still exists, if there is anyone left who remembers us. She paused, feeling the weight of 2 million lives pressing down upon her shoulders. We could use some help. The message launched into space, traveling at the speed of light toward a homeworld that had been silent for more than half a century. And Yuki did not expect an answer, but humans had never been good at giving up. And she would be damned if she was the governor who taught them how. The Valkyrie ground forces landed at dawn on the 4th day, expecting to meet a population broken by orbital bombardment and ready to accept their chains. Instead, they found something that none of their 43 previous conquests had prepared them for. First wave of dropships descended upon the colonial capital of Nova Portland, their plasma cannons already warming as they prepared to crush any final resistance. Inside, Valkyrie soldiers checked their weapons with the bored efficiency of professionals who had done this too, many times to count. The lead dropship exploded 300 meters above the ground, struck by a missile that had been assembled from mining equipment and agricultural chemicals by a team of engineers who had not slept in 3 days. Commander Zorath watched the destruction from orbit with disbelief. These primitives should not have been able to touch the ships, should not have possessed the technical knowledge to modify their crude technology into effective weapons. Landing force reports 20% casualties, his tactical officer announced. They are requesting heavy air support. 20% casualties. Zora thought on a world with no military, against a species that had never fought a war. Granted, he said through clenched teeth. Burn everything within 5 kilometers of the landing zone. The plasma bombardment turned the outskirts of Nova Portland into a wasteland of melted glass and scorched earth. And the Valkyrie ground forces advanced through the destruction with renewed confidence. They found the city empty. The humans had evacuated during the night, using underground tunnels that did not appear on any sensor scan, moving 200,000 civilians through passages carved by mining machines and reinforced by generations of paranoid colonists who had always feared that someday something might come from the stars. The Valkyrie pursued. And that was when the real nightmare began. Every building had been rigged with traps, explosives hidden in walls, toxic chemicals stored in containers that ruptured when disturbed, automated systems that locked doors and filled rooms with carbon monoxide while the inhabitants fled through secret passages. Valkyrie soldiers died by the dozens, killed not by warriors, but by an enemy that refused to fight fairly, that struck from shadows and vanished before retaliation could be organized in the farmlands outside the city. The colonists had flooded the fields with water and electrified the irrigation systems. Valkyrie patrol units walked into what looked like shallow puddles and died screaming as currents surged through their bodies. In the mountains to the north, teenagers who had never held weapons before flew agricultural aircraft loaded with homemade bombs in the landing craft, sacrificing themselves to destroy machines worth more than their entire colony's annual economic output. A 17-year-old girl named Sarah Chun became the first human ace pilot in history, shooting down 5 Valkyrie fighters with a crop duster that should not have been able to fly in combat, before a plasma bolt finally caught her and scattered her atoms across the sky she had defended with her life. Her name was broadcast across the colony's emergency network, and suddenly everyone wanted to fight. The engineers hacked Valkyrie communication frequencies and flooded them with false intelligence, sending entire battalions chasing phantom human positions while the real defenders prepared ambushes elsewhere. The doctors turned hospitals into fortresses, refusing to evacuate patients who could not be moved, defending them with scalpels and surgical lasers until Valkyrie. Commanders learned to avoid medical facilities entirely. The farmers drove harvesting machines into enemy formations, crushing soldiers beneath vehicles designed to cut wheat, dying behind steering wheels with grim satisfaction on their faces. Commander Zarath had expected the conquest to take 3 days. By the end of the first week, he had lost more troops than in his previous 5 campaigns combined. Why won't they surrender? He demanded during his nightly briefing, slamming his fist against the tactical display hard enough to crack the screen. We have destroyed their capital. We have killed tens of thousands. We have demonstrated our overwhelming superiority. Why do they continue fighting? His advisors had no answer, because the Valkyrie had never encountered a species like humanity before. The other conquered races had fought with logic, with calculation, with a cold assessment of odds that inevitably led to surrender when victory became impossible. They had understood that survival, even in chains, was preferable to extinction. The humans did not seem to understand this at all. They fought when they had no chance of winning, died for positions that held no strategic value, sacrificed themselves to save strangers they had never met. They were not soldiers. They were something worse: believers, fanatics, creatures who valued something more than their own survival. Governor Tanaka had retreated to a bunker in the northern mountains, surrounded by the remnants of her government and the survivors who had managed to escape the fallen cities. She recorded a message each night, broadcasting it across the colony and into space, speaking to her people and to the universe beyond. "This is day 31 of the siege of New Cascadia," she said, a voice hoarse from exhaustion and grief. "We have lost Nova Portland. We have lost the southern settlements. And we have lost so many people that I have stopped counting because the numbers break my heart." She paused, gathering strength from somewhere deep inside herself. "But we are still here. We are still fighting. We have made them pay for every kilometer they have taken. And we will continue to make them pay until we have nothing left to give." Outside the bunker, the sound of distant explosions marked another Valkyrie assault on the mountain defenses. Another wave of attackers that would be met by exhausted defenders with dwindling ammunition and undiminished determination. "I do not know if anyone is listening," Tanaka continued. "I do not know if Earth exists, or if humanity remembers that we are here, or if our messages have traveled far enough to reach anyone who cares." She looked at the camera with eyes that had seen too much death and too little hope. "But if this is the end, let the record show that we did not kneel. Let the universe remember that when New Cascadia faced extinction, we chose to die on our feet rather than live on our knees." She ended the transmission and walked to the observation window, looking out at the night sky filled with the lights of Valkyrie ships, wondering how much longer they could hold. And then she saw something that made her heart stop. New lights were appearing in the sky. Lights that moved with purpose and speed. Lights that did not match any Valkyrie formation she had observed in a month of warfare. "Marcus!" she shouted. "What is happening up there?" Her advisor rushed to the sensors, and when he looked up, his face held an expression she had never seen before, an expression of pure, overwhelming shock. "Governor," he whispered, "they're not Valkyrie." The communication system crackled to life, and a voice spoke in perfect English. A voice that carried across 62 years of silence and arrived exactly when all hope had been lost. "New Cascadia. This is the United Earth Navy Battle Group Perseverance. We received your transmission. Apologies for the delay. It's been a long trip. Yuki." Tanaka felt tears streaming down her face as the voice continued. "We're here to bring you home." Commander Zorath stared at his tactical display with an emotion. he had not experienced in 50 years of warfare genuine uncertainty. 12 ships had appeared at the edge of the system. Vessels of brutal angular design that bore no resemblance to anything in the Valkyrie database. Ships that bristled with weapons his sensors could not fully analyze. Ships that moved with the confidence of predators who had never been prey. "Identify those vessels," he commanded. His voice steady despite the cold knot forming in his stomach. His tactical officer worked frantically at the console, running scan after scan, comparing the readings to every known species in Valkyrie records. Unknown configuration. "Commander," Kreth reported, his voice carrying a tremor that Zorath had never heard before. "Hull composition does not match any cataloged material. Weapon signatures are unlike anything we have encountered, and their power output." He stopped, checking his readings again as if he could not believe what he was seeing. "Their power output exceeds our entire fleet combined." Zorath felt his certainty beginning to crack. The Valkyrie had conquered 43 species because they had always possessed superior technology, superior firepower, superior everything. What did it mean when someone else had the advantage? The communication channel activated, and a human face appeared on screen, an older male with gray hair and cold eyes. Wearing a uniform of black and silver that bore symbol Zorath did not recognize. "This is Admiral Michael Chun of the United Earth Navy," the human said, and his voice carried none of the fear that Zorath had learned to expect from conquered species. "You are engaged in hostile action against a human colony. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Zorath laughed, though the sound rang hollow even to his own ears. He had never retreated, had never shown weakness. And he would not start now against these newcomers who had no idea what they were facing. "I am Commander Zorath of the Valkyrie Dominion," he replied, "and we do not retreat. Your threats mean nothing. You are 12 ships against our 40, and you have no understanding of Valkyrie military capability." Admiral Chun's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes that made Zorath's combat instincts scream a warning he did not understand. "You touched our people," Chun said. And the words were not a threat, they were a statement of fact. A declaration of something that had already been decided. "Your answer is war, then?" Zorath asked, signaling his fleet to battle stations. "My answer," Chun replied, "is education." The communication link closed, and Zorath ordered his fleet to engage. 40 Valkyrie warships moved into attack formation, plasma cannons charging, missile pods opening, shields at maximum power. The 12 human ships did not maneuver to evade. They simply accelerated directly toward the Valkyrie fleet with what appeared to be suicidal confidence. "Target the lead vessel," Zorath commanded. Full forward barrage. 40 ships fired simultaneously, filling space with enough plasma and explosive force to crack a small moon. The lead human ship, the one their transmissions had called Thermopylae, sailed through the barrage without slowing down. The plasma bolts struck its hull and dissipated like rain against stone. The missiles detonated against shields that did not even flicker. Impossible. Kreth whispered the Thermopylae returned fire. Zorath had seen many weapons in his long career. Plasma cannons that could melt through bulkheads, missile swarms that could overwhelm point defense systems, particle beams that could slice ships in half. He had never seen anything like the human railguns. The projectiles moved so fast that his sensors could barely track them. Solid slugs of super-dense metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed, carrying kinetic energy that made Valkyrie weapons look like toys. The first shot punched through the shields of his flagship like they did not exist, tearing through 3 decks and exiting the other side before Zorath even understood what had happened. The second shot destroyed his engine section. The third shot would have killed him if the Thermopylae had not moved on to other targets across the battlefield. Valkyrie ships were dying the human weapons adapted in real time, compensating for evasive maneuvers before they were completed, finding weak points in armor that the Valkyrie had believed impenetrable. Torpedoes that seemed to think for themselves weaved through defensive fire and struck with surgical precision. One human cruiser engaged 8 Valkyrie destroyers simultaneously and destroyed them in under a minute. Another human ship deployed fighters that moved like nothing Zorath had ever seen. Small craft piloted by beings who seemed to anticipate every Valkyrie response before it was made. The Valkyrie had spent centuries believing they were the apex predators of the galaxy, the supreme military power that no one could challenge in 11 minutes. They learned other Wizarath floated in the wreckage of his command deck, watching through shattered viewports as the last of his ships surrendered or died. His fleet, the pride of the Valkyrie expansion force, had been reduced to debris by 12 human vessels that had barely been scratched. A communication signal reached his emergency receiver, and he answered it because there was nothing else left to do. "Commander Zorath," Admiral Chun's voice said, calm and controlled as if he had just finished a routine training exercise. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your ground forces on New Cascadia are surrounded. You will order them to surrender, or we will continue this demonstration." Zorath wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain his dignity and his defiance. But he had watched 17,000 of his soldiers die in less time than it took to eat a meal. "What are you?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. "We have conquered 43 species. We have dominated this region of space for 600 years. How is this possible?" There was a pause, and when Chun spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been pride, or might have been warning. "We are humanity," he said, "and for 62 years, we have been searching for our lost children while preparing for any threat we might encounter. We built these ships to face unknown dangers, to protect our people wherever they might be, to ensure that no one would ever harm our colonies again." He paused, and his next words were not for Zorath alone but for every Valkyrie who could hear the transmission. "You thought New Cascadia was alone. You thought they were weak because they were isolated. You thought you could take them without consequence." The Admiral's voice hardened into something cold and absolute. "There are no isolated humans. There are no forgotten colonies. There is only humanity, and we come back for our own always." Zorath gave the order to surrender, because he was not stupid enough to throw away more lives against an enemy that could destroy him. Without effort, as Valkyrie soldiers laid down their weapons on the surface of New Cascadia, as human marines in advanced powered armor secured the prisoners with efficient professionalism, Commander Zorath found himself thinking about the future of his species. The Valkyrie had built an empire on the assumption that they would always be the strongest, that no one could challenge their dominance, that the galaxy was theirs to harvest. Now they knew that somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity was waiting, watching, and remembering every wrong done to its children. Zorath had never known fear before today. He suspected he would know it for the rest of his life. The shuttle descended through clouds that still carried the ash of destroyed cities, landing on the cracked pavement of what had once been Nova Portland's Central Plaza. Governor Yuki Tanaka stood, waiting with the survivors of her government, watching as the first Earthship touched down on New Cascadia in more than 60 years. Her clothes were torn, her face was bruised, and she had not slept in 4 days. But she refused to be anywhere else for this moment. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and Admiral Michael Chun stepped out into the pale light of an alien sun, surrounded by Marines in gleaming powered armor who moved with the disciplined grace of soldiers who had trained for years to be the tip of humanity's spear. Chun was older than Tanaka had expected, his face lined with the weight of command, his eyes carrying shadows that spoke of battles fought and losses endured. He walked toward her with measured steps, and when he reached her, he stopped and offered a formal salute. "Governor Tanaka," he said, "on behalf of the United Earth government, I apologize for taking so long." Tanaka felt something break inside her. A wall she had built over 62 years of silence. A barrier of necessary strength that had kept her standing when everything she loved was being destroyed. Tears ran down her face, and she did not try to stop them. "We thought you had forgotten us," she whispered, the words emerging as a confession of the deepest wound her people had carried for generations. Chun shook his head, and his own eyes glistened with emotion. He did not quite manage to hide. "We never forgot," he said. "Not for a single day." He explained what had happened, speaking gently as medics and relief workers streamed past them into the ruined city 62 years ago. A catastrophic solar event had destroyed the quantum relay network that connected Earth's colonies, severing communication lines across dozens of light years in a single devastating moment. The inner colonies had survived because they were close enough to rebuild connections quickly, but the distant settlements had simply vanished from the network. Earth had panicked. Governments had mobilized every resource to restore contact with their lost children. But the technology of the time could not bridge the gap fast enough, so they had started building new ships, faster and stronger than anything that had come before. New communication systems that did not rely on the fragile relay network. New weapons to face whatever threats might have emerged in the darkness while humanity was looking elsewhere. "We launched the first search missions 15 years ago," Chun continued. "But space is vast and there were so many lost colonies to find. We have been working our way outward, system by system, star by star, following old records and faint signals. How many have you found?" Tanaka asked. 47, Chun replied. "Some were thriving, some were struggling, and some—" He paused, and grief flickered across his face. "Some did not make it. We found empty cities and silent graves on worlds where our people had slowly starved or succumbed to diseases we could have cured if we had been there." Tanaka understood the weight behind those words, the guilt that Earth must have carried for every colony that died alone in the darkness. "But you kept looking," she said. "We will always keep looking," Chun answered. "That is what humanity does. We do not abandon our own. Not ever. Not even when it seems impossible." Behind him, more shuttles were landing, disgorging soldiers and doctors and engineers who immediately began helping the colonists. Field hospitals went up in minutes, food distribution centers in hours. Emergency shelters by nightfall. A young Marine approached Tanaka with a data tablet, her face earnest beneath her helmet. "Governor," she said, "we have messages for you, millions of them. Transmissions from Earth, from the families of the original colonists, from descendants who have been waiting their whole lives to hear from you." Tanaka took the tablet with trembling hands and activated the first message. A woman appeared on screen, elderly but vibrant, with features that bore an unmistakable resemblance to Tanaka's own grandmother. "My name is Keiko Yamamoto," the woman said, "and my great-grandmother was Aiko Tanaka, who boarded the colony ship Endeavour 127 years ago. I have spent my entire life hoping that someday I would learn what happened to her descendants." She smiled through tears that mirrored Tanaka's own. "If any of you are still out there, please know that we never stopped looking, we never stopped hoping, and we never stopped loving you." The message ended, and Tanaka could not speak. She stood there holding evidence that Earth had remembered them, had searched for them, had refused to accept their loss even after 6 decades of silence. Chun gave her a moment, then spoke again. "There is something else you should know," he said. "After we found the first lost colonies and learned what some of them had faced: hostile species, environmental catastrophes, isolation-induced social collapse, we made a decision." He gestured toward the ships still visible in orbit. The warships that had destroyed the Valkyrie fleet in minutes. We built a navy that could protect every human settlement in the galaxy. He continued. We developed weapons that could match any threat, defenses that could withstand any attack. And we stationed fleets along the borders of known space to ensure that no one would ever threaten our people again. Why? Tanaka asked. Why go to such lengths for colonies that might already be dead? Chun's answer was simple. Because you are our family. Because every human life matters, no matter how distant, no matter how long they have been silent. Because the alternative was accepting that some of us were expendable. And that is something humanity will never do. Over the following days, the colonists of New Cascadia learned what had happened to Earth in their absence. The planet had changed, had grown, had become the heart of a civilization that spanned dozens of star systems. The wars and divisions that had marked the old days had faded, replaced by a unified government that prioritized the protection and expansion of humanity. They learned about the technology that had been developed, faster than light drives that could cross in months what had once taken years, medical advances that had extended the human lifespan, communication systems that connected worlds across impossible distances, and they learned about the other lost colonies, the ones that had been found, the ones still being searched for, the ones that had become part of a growing network of human settlements that stretched across the arm of the galaxy. We want to offer you a choice, Chun told Tanaka on the 7th day after the battle, as they stood together watching reconstruction crews rebuild what the Valkyrie had destroyed. You can rejoin Earth, become part of the united government, receive all the benefits and responsibilities of full membership in human civilization. He paused. Or you can remain independent. Maintain the identity you have built over 62 years. With Earth's protection and support, but without Earth's control. You have earned the right to decide your own future. Tanaka thought about the generations who had been born here, who had never known Earth except as stories and dreams. She thought about the traditions they had created, the culture they had built, the identity they had forged in isolation. Can we be both? She asked. Can we be New Cascadians who are also part of Earth? Children who have grown up but still belong to the family? Chun smiled. That is exactly what we hoped you would say. 1 year later, a memorial was dedicated in the rebuilt center of Nova Portland, bearing the names of every colonist who had died in the siege and every soldier who had fallen defending. The Miyuki Tanaka stood before it with Admiral Chun at her side, surrounded by colonists and Earth citizens who had become one people, united by a bond that 62 years of silence had not been able to break. The inscription at the base of the memorial read, "They believed Earth had forgotten them." Earth was simply finding its way back, above them. A new quantum relay pulsed with light, connecting New Cascadia to the rest of humanity, ensuring that they would never be alone again, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars. More ships were searching. More families were waiting. More lost children were about to learn the truth that New Cascadia had discovered humanity did not abandon. Its own not ever, not even across centuries and stars. That was not who they were, that was not who they would ever be.